What if everything you've believed about anxiety is incomplete? What if anxiety isn't the enemy but a messenger from the depths of your psyche? Carl Jung, one of the most influential figures in depth psychology, did not see anxiety as a malfunction or flaw to be eradicated. He saw it as a symbolic cry from the soul, an urgent signal that something deep within you has been silenced for too long. When you feel that tightness in your chest, the racing thoughts, the irrational fears that appear even when life seems fine on the surface, it's not weakness, it's not random, and it's definitely not just a chemical imbalance. It is the voice of your unconscious demanding to be heard. We live in a world obsessed with quick fixes. When anxiety arises, we're taught to breathe deeply, take medication, or distract ourselves. But these methods, while sometimes necessary, often act like silencing a fire alarm instead of putting out the fire. Jung believed that anxiety emerges when a part of you, often a wounded or rejected part, tries to re-enter consciousness. It's the soul's protest against a life lived in disconnection from your inner truth. And the more you try to suppress it, the louder it becomes. Most people treat anxiety as something to escape, but Jung invites us to treat it as a message to interpret. It's not asking for suppression, it's asking for attention. The question is not, how do I stop feeling this way, but rather, what is this trying to tell me? That shift in mindset is profound because anxiety in this light is no longer a malfunction. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of the inner conflict between who you are and who you are pretending to be. Anxiety is often the first sign that your soul is awakening, demanding a more honest life. And though it feels terrifying, it can be the beginning of transformation. The goal, then, is not to fight anxiety, but to listen to it, to trace it back to its symbolic roots and ask what part of you has been denied, what truth has been buried, and what part of you is longing to return. Because in that message lies the path not just to relief but to wholeness. Beneath the surface of your anxiety lies something far more ancient and powerful: your shadow. According to Carl Jung, the shadow is the hidden part of yourself, the emotions, impulses, and traits that you were taught to suppress, deny, or be ashamed of. It is everything you don't want to be but are, everything you try to hide from others and most painfully from yourself. But here's the truth. What you bury doesn't die, it waits. And eventually it returns. Not as a conscious thought, but as inner turmoil, as restlessness, as anxiety. From a young age, you were conditioned to act a certain way. You learned that anger is unacceptable, vulnerability is weakness, and sadness should be hidden. So you smiled when you were hurting, acted confident when you were afraid, and built a persona to win approval. Over time, this social mask became your identity, and your shadow, everything you denied, was exiled into your unconscious. But the psyche seeks wholeness, and what is repressed always fights to return. This is why your anxiety often feels inexplicable, because it's not caused by your conscious mind. It is your shadow knocking on the door of your awareness, demanding to be seen. When anxiety strikes, it's tempting to blame it on circumstances, stress, or genetics. But Jung reminds us to look deeper. Anxiety, in many cases, is the shadow's scream for recognition. It shows up in self-sabotage, in panic over small things, in irrational fears. Not because you're broken, but because you've disconnected from a vital part of who you are. The more you try to be what the world expects, the more distant you become from what your soul needs. And that disconnection becomes unbearable. The healing begins when you stop fighting the shadow and start listening to it. It holds not only your pain, but also your power, your authenticity, your emotional depth, your intuitive wisdom. Integrating the shadow isn't easy. It requires brutal honesty, self-compassion, and the willingness to feel what you've avoided. But only by doing so can the anxiety lose its grip. Because when the shadow is no longer rejected, it no longer needs to scream. And in that silence, you begin to find peace. Not by escaping yourself, but by finally coming home to every part of who you are. Have you ever wondered why your chest tightens even when there's nothing visibly wrong? Why your stomach knots, your throat closes, or your heart races despite all your efforts to stay calm? According to Carl Jung, these physical symptoms are not random. They are not just bodily malfunctions. They are messages, symbolic expressions of the unconscious using the only language it has left when your mind refuses to listen: the body. The body, Jung believed, is the mirror of the psyche. When psychological content is repressed, when pain, grief, anger, or fear are denied expression, it doesn't disappear. It finds refuge in the physical body. That tightness in your chest may not be about the present moment. It may be an echo of an old fear you never faced. That lump in your throat may not be about what was just said. It may be the silence you've carried for years. The anxiety in your body is your soul trying to speak because your conscious mind has stopped listening. In a culture that prioritizes productivity over presence, image over truth, and solutions over understanding, we are taught to treat symptoms, numb them, suppress them, manage them. But this ignores the root, the disconnection between body and soul. Your anxiety, your insomnia, your chronic tension may not be medical mysteries. They may be psychic signals, expressions of a deeper truth trying to surface. When the unconscious cannot find symbolic outlets through dreams, art, expression, or honest reflection, it spills into the body. This is why superficial methods often fail. A breathing exercise may offer temporary relief, but it cannot heal the wound of a silenced soul. Because the problem is not in your lungs or your muscles. It's in the split between your true self and the version of you that the world expects. To heal, you must begin not by controlling the body, but by listening to it. What sensations return again and again? What emotions live beneath the surface of your tension? Your body is not betraying you, it is trying to help you reconnect. When you stop treating the body as an enemy and begin treating it as a guide, everything changes, because behind every symptom there is a story that longs to be heard. At the heart of your anxiety lies a silent war, one that most people never realize they're fighting. It's not between you and the world, not between you and your responsibilities. It's a battle within, ego versus soul. Carl Jung understood this inner divide better than most. He saw the ego as the constructed self, the mask you wear to fit in, to survive, to meet expectations. It's the part of you that clings to control, routine, performance, and the image of who you should be. But the soul is wild. It's raw, honest, intuitive. It wants truth over comfort, wholeness over approval, freedom over perfection. The problem begins when your life is driven entirely by the ego, when every decision is filtered through the question, will this make me acceptable? In this state, the soul is pushed into silence. You become disconnected from your own depths, from your needs, your desires, your authenticity. And yet the soul doesn't disappear. It waits, and when it cannot be heard, it begins to protest, first quietly, then through discomfort, and eventually through the sharp scream of anxiety. This is the root conflict. The ego wants to maintain the persona, the image you show to the world, but the soul wants liberation, and anxiety arises when the distance between these two becomes too great. You feel restless, empty, and afraid, not because something is wrong outside, but because something is misaligned within. You are living as someone you were never meant to be, and your inner world knows it. This disconnection doesn't just affect your thoughts, it shapes your body, your emotions, your sense of meaning. And the more you cling to ego-driven control, the more you feel like life is slipping out of your hands. That's because it is. You were not born to be a mask. You were born to be whole. Jung taught that healing comes when the ego no longer suppresses the soul but serves it. When control gives way to connection, when image gives way to truth. Anxiety then is not the enemy. It's the alarm bell signaling the fracture between who you are and who you pretend to be. And the moment you stop running from this war and start listening to it is the moment real transformation begins. True healing doesn't come from escaping pain, silencing symptoms, or perfecting the mask you show the world. It comes from individuation, the journey Carl Jung called the path of becoming whole. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning, expectations, and self-denial. It's a deep psychological and spiritual process, often uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but ultimately liberating. Because only by integrating what you've rejected in yourself can you begin to feel at peace. From childhood, you were taught who to be: polite, productive, agreeable, strong. You learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which were not. Over time, you began to shape your identity around external approval, around the persona. But what happened to the other parts? The sadness you weren't allowed to express, the anger you had to suppress, the dreams you were told to abandon. They didn't vanish. They became your shadow. And the longer they remain unacknowledged, the louder your anxiety becomes. Individuation is the sacred process of reclaiming those parts, of reconciling with your own shadow, of seeing through the illusions of the ego, and of reconnecting with your inner truth. It's not self-improvement. It's self-recovery. It asks you to face what you've avoided, to feel what you've numbed, and to release the roles you've been performing just to be accepted. In doing so, the soul begins to breathe again, and the anxiety that once haunted you starts to dissolve, not because it's been defeated, but because it's been heard. Jung believed that the psyche wants to heal itself, but it needs your participation. It needs your willingness to stop pretending, to stop running, and to begin listening. Individuation is not a destination, it is a lifelong unfolding. But every time you choose truth over performance, awareness over avoidance, you take a step closer to your authentic self. And in that alignment, anxiety transforms from a tormentor into a guide. It shows you where you are still divided. It points you toward the places that need healing. This is the invitation to stop surviving and start becoming. To stop pleasing and start living. Because you were never meant to be half of yourself. You were meant to be whole. In a world that glorifies speed, noise, and constant productivity, the most powerful tools for inner healing are often the ones we overlook: silence, symbols, and solitude. Carl Jung understood that the journey of individuation, the return to the true self, cannot be completed through logic alone. It requires stepping outside the noise of the outer world and entering the symbolic, intuitive language of the inner world. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the sacred space where the unconscious begins to speak. In silence, you begin to hear what distraction has kept hidden: the grief beneath your restlessness, the truth behind your anxiety, the desire buried beneath your compliance. Jung saw silence as the doorway to the soul, where deeper material can emerge not as words but as feelings, images, sensations. Without silence, there is no dialogue with the unconscious, only noise drowning out your deepest knowing. But the unconscious rarely speaks in plain sentences. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in recurring images, in the strange emotional pull of a song, or the unshakable feeling tied to a memory you can't explain. These symbols carry meaning far beyond what the rational mind can grasp. Jung called this the language of the soul. To interpret symbols is to begin the alchemical process of self-integration, translating the metaphors of the unconscious into conscious understanding. And to do this, you need solitude, not isolation, but intentional withdrawal from distraction, from roles, from performance. Solitude is the container where silence and symbolism can do their work. It is where the ego loosens its grip and the deeper self can begin to emerge. In solitude, you are no longer acting for anyone. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are simply present with all that arises. These tools, silence, symbols, and solitude, are not escapes. They are returns. They help bridge the gap between the fragmented self and the whole self. They are the inner technologies of transformation, long forgotten in a world that favors immediacy over meaning. But if you are willing to slow down, to listen deeply, and to sit with what emerges, these tools can help you unlock what no external solution ever could: the quiet wisdom of your own soul. Real transformation is not a gentle invitation. It is a call that shakes you to your core. It asks not for passive understanding, but for radical responsibility and unshakable courage. Carl Jung knew that healing the psyche wasn't about bypassing pain or hiding behind intellectual insight. It was about stepping directly into the fire of your own truth, even when everything inside you wants to run. The path of individuation, the process of becoming whole, cannot be walked by those who refuse to take ownership of their inner world. It begins when you stop blaming circumstances, other people, or fate for your suffering and start asking, what within me must be faced? That shift from victimhood to self-responsibility is the true threshold of transformation. And crossing it is not easy, because healing demands that you confront everything you've denied: your shadow, your contradictions, your fears, your buried pain. It requires letting go of the masks that once protected you but now imprison you. It calls for mourning old versions of yourself, the ones you built to survive, but which now keep you from living fully. This is not a comfortable process. It is raw. It is sacred. It is deeply human. Courage in this context is not the absence of fear, but the decision to face that fear with open eyes. It's choosing to stay present with discomfort rather than running from it. It's sitting in the silence of your pain long enough to hear what it's trying to teach you. Because only through that courageous encounter can the message behind the suffering be revealed, and only then can true change begin. Responsibility means saying, "I will no longer wait to be saved." It means recognizing that no one can walk this path for you. Not a therapist, not a partner, not a book, not a video. You are the one who must do the work. You are the one who must choose to stop pretending that everything is fine and start reclaiming your soul, piece by piece. The truth is, anxiety didn't come to ruin you, it came to awaken you. But awakening is not an idea, it is a choice. And that choice must be made again and again, especially when it hurts. Especially when it would be easier to numb, to distract, to sleepwalk through another day. Because only by facing the truth do you become free. At the end of this long and often painful journey, one truth remains. What you resist persists, but what you accept transforms. This is the final invitation Carl Jung leaves us with. Not to fix yourself, not to strive for perfection, but to accept what has been hidden, feared, or rejected within. Because healing doesn't begin when the pain ends. It begins when the fight against yourself ends. Your anxiety was never your enemy. It was a mirror reflecting the parts of your life that were misaligned, the truths you buried, the masks you wore for survival, the tightness in your chest, the sleepless nights, the constant self-doubt. These weren't signs of weakness. They were calls to return to your wholeness. And the more you tried to silence those signs, the more persistent they became. Not to punish you, but to awaken you. Transformation in its truest form begins with surrender. Not giving up, but letting go. Letting go of who you think you should be. Letting go of the stories that no longer serve you. Letting go of the illusion that peace is found outside of yourself. When you finally turn inward without judgment and look directly into the eyes of your anxiety, not as a monster but as a messenger, you begin to see what was always waiting underneath. Your truth. Acceptance is not passive. It is a powerful act of love. It says, "I am willing to meet myself as I am." It is this moment of deep self-honesty that begins to soften the grip of anxiety. Because the war within ends not when you conquer your feelings, but when you make space for them, when you allow them to reveal what they came to show. You didn't come here just to function. You came here to feel, to live, to become. And becoming whole is not about eliminating darkness. It is about integrating it, giving every part of yourself a place at the table of your life. This is what Jung meant by individuation, and this is where freedom is born. So ask yourself, will you continue to run from the discomfort, or will you sit with it long enough to finally hear what it's been trying to tell you? Your healing doesn't begin with force. It begins with the simplest, most courageous act. Acceptance. You may have spent your life doing the right thing, being kind, staying silent when it hurt, hiding your fears behind a smile. But if anxiety, restlessness, or a quiet emptiness keep returning, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a message from your soul. Carl Jung believed that anxiety is not the problem. It's a call from within, a sign that something deep and essential is asking to be seen. At this stage of life, you no longer need to live for approval or to fit in. Now is the time to return to yourself, to listen to what you've suppressed, to face old fears with compassion, and to accept the parts of you that were once denied. Healing doesn't begin with resistance. It begins with gentle acceptance. Anxiety is not your enemy. It's a compass pointing you home. And perhaps now, more than ever, you are being invited to live not just quietly, but authentically. Not just to survive, but to be whole. You have earned the right to live with inner peace. And that peace begins the moment you stop fighting yourself and start truly listening.